Since the last time he had gone on an expedition, these really were passionate explorers, people who wanted to be on this mission to see what had changed and visit the Titanic wreck again. So indeed a tragedy, and I found it interesting that the OceanGate statement also said that they are deeply grateful for the countless men and women of multiple organizations of the international community with their wide-ranging resources. I mean, just a few hours ago we were mentioning that another RAF plane had arrived in St. John's in Newfoundland in Canada, that 2 more were expected. This has been a massive undertaking, a massive operation. Let's see if we can just go over to Dan, who's over at the press conference. And Dan, I mean, I'm assuming rather that the Coast Guard will now confirm this information and also provide more details on what exactly they found.
Yes, that is our expectation, and in fact here are the lead officials from the US Coast Guard, a number of officials arriving here all at the same time. There is Rear Admiral John Mauger, who's been coordinating this operation since its earliest days. We were promised further details of what it is that they found this morning, what constitutes this debris field, and now let's hear what the US Coast Guard has to say.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and over the past few days. This afternoon, Rear Admiral John Mauger will be providing an update on the most recent findings from ROV operations in search of the Titan submersible. He will provide a brief statement and provide the opportunity for questions after. Please limit your questions to 1 per outlet. Following the briefing, the Joint Information Center staff and I will be here to help you with any of your further needs. May I now please introduce Rear Admiral John Mauger.
This morning, an ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris. In consultation with experts from within the Unified Command, the debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Upon this determination, we immediately notified the families. On behalf of the United States Coast Guard and the entire Unified Command, I offer my deepest condolences to the families. I can only imagine what this has been like for them, and I hope that this discovery provides some solace during this difficult time. Additionally, we've been in close contact with the British and French consuls general to ensure that they are fully apprised and that their concerns are being addressed. The outpouring of support in this highly complex search operation has been robust and immensely appreciated. We are grateful for the rapid mobilization of experts on the undersea search and rescue, and we thank all of the agencies and personnel for their role in the response. We're also incredibly grateful for the full spectrum of international assistance that's been provided. The ROVs will remain on scene and continue to gather information. Again, our most heartfelt condolences go out to the loved ones of the crew. We'll now take questions.
Rear Admiral, can you talk about the delay in reporting the vessel missing and what impact that had on the recovery?
This was a incredibly complex case, and we're still working to develop the details for the timeline involved with this casualty and the response. And so we'll provide that information.
About the recovery of the body.
James Matthews from Sky News. John, what other debris have you found? And have you found any trace of those who were on?
So this is an incredibly complex operating environment on the seafloor, over 2 miles beneath the surface. And so the remote operating vehicle has been searching, and it is highly capable. And we've been able to classify parts of the pressure chamber for the Titan submersible. Let me refer to one of my undersea experts here, Mr. Paul Hankin, to talk about the nature of some of the debris.
Thank you, Admiral. So essentially we found 5 different major pieces of debris that told us that it was the remains of the Titan. The initial thing we found was the nose cone, which was outside of the pressure hull. We then found a large debris field. Within that large debris field, we found the front end bell of the pressure hull. That was the first indication that there was a catastrophic event. Shortly thereafter, we found a second smaller debris field. Within that debris field, we found the other end of the pressure hull, the aft end bell, which was basically comprised of the totality of that pressure vessel. We continue to map the debris field, and as the Admiral said, we will do the best we can to fully map out what's down there.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
It's a very difficult question to ask, but it will be an important one for the families, of course. What are the prospects of recovering the bodies of the missing?
So the questions was related. I'm restating the question from the standpoint of sometimes it's hard to hear the question here. What are the prospects for recovering crew members? And so this is a incredibly unforgiving environment down there on the seafloor, and the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. And so we'll continue to work and continue to search the area down there, but I don't have an answer for prospects at this time.
Admiral, it's Tom Costello at NBC News. Is there any suggestion? Any suggestion at all that the sub itself collided with the wreckage of Titanic, or that instead it might have imploded above the wreckage and then rained down nearby?
So the question was, is there any question as to whether or not the sub collided with the Titanic or whether it imploded above and debris field created from that? So the location of the Titan submersible was in an area that was approximately 1,600 feet from the wreck of the Titanic. I have an expert here that is familiar with that area and can talk about the debris field and what the debris field indicates in terms of where the casualty may have occurred.
Rear Admiral, really quickly, can you tell me when that massive fleet will be called back?
The expert voice is coming up to answer the question.
Thank you, Admiral. So the question is, where does the wreck lie in relation to the Titanic? I didn't hear the Admiral's answer. I think 1,600 feet. Was that correct, Admiral?
Yep, you got it.
So that's off the bow of Titanic. It's in an area where there is not any debris of Titanic. It is a smooth bottom. To my knowledge and anything I've seen, there's no Titanic wreckage in that area. And again, 200 plus meters from the bow, and consistent with the location of last communication for an implosion in the water column. And the size of the debris field is consistent with that implosion in the water column.
Thanks.
What would cause the question in terms of the timing here? You say that this was a catastrophic implosion, and I know it's early on, but is it your estimation that this happened right at the moment when they lost contact, an hour and 45 minutes after the descent?
So the question was about the timing of the catastrophic implosion. Right now, it is too early to tell with that. We know that as we've been prosecuting this search over the course of the last 72 hours and beyond, that we've had sonar buoys in the water nearly continuously and have not detected any catastrophic events when those sonar buoys have been in the water. So.
Can you describe what happens from here, sir, in the next days and weeks in terms of finding any more debris? What happens from here?
So we will, the question was, what happens from here? What's the next phase? And so right now, again, our thoughts are with the families and making sure that they have an understanding as best as we can provide of what happened and begin to find some closure. In terms of the large process, we're going to continue to investigate the site of the debris field. And then I know that there's also a lot of questions about how, why, and when did this happen. And so, you know, those are questions that we will collect as much information as we can on now, while the governments are meeting and discussing, you know, what an investigation of this nature of a casualty might look like. This is something that happened, I'll just remind everybody, this is something that happened in a remote portion of the ocean with people from, you know, several different countries around the world. And so it is a complex case to work through, but I'm confident that those questions will begin to get answered.
Is there any suggestion that time factors, speed, anything could have prevented this or saved 5 people on board, or is this quite simply a catastrophic accident?
The question was there any suggestion that time factors may have played a role or a consideration in the casualty here? And so the debris field is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. Again, while we were prosecuting the search, we had listening devices in the water throughout and did not hear any signs of catastrophic failure from those. And so we're going to continue to investigate, or we're going to continue to document the information there and understand, based on all the information we have, the timeline.
What does this mean for the resources required for the investigation? Which ship is pulling out and coming in?
So the question was, what are the resources required for the investigation, and which ships will be pulling out and staying in? And so it's too early for me to talk about an investigation. That's a decision that's going to be taken outside of the search and efforts that I was leading. But we do have a number of vessels. We have 9 vessels on the scene right now. We had medical personnel on scene. We had other technicians on scene. And so we will begin to demobilize personnel and vessels from the scene over the course of the next 24 hours. But we're going to continue remote operations on the sea floor. And I don't have a timeline for when we would intend to stop remote operations on the seafloor at this point.
Admiral, as a result of this, do you think there should be changes in the way these are safety rated or inspected so that this won't happen again?
Yeah, the question was essentially about do you think that there should be changes in safety ratings or inspection for these standards? I know that there's a lot of questions about why, how, when this happened, and the members of the Unified Command, have those questions too, as professionals and experts that work in this environment. And this is an incredibly difficult and dangerous environment to work in out there. But those questions about the regulations that apply and the standards, that's going to be, I'm sure, focus of future review. Right now, we're focused on documenting the scene and continuing the subfloor operation.
Can you say it this time?
We don't know the timing here, but there was the banging noises yesterday that redirected and redeployed the ROVs to this area. Is there anything conclusive in those noises, and did that redirection and then finding this debris field today all help?
So throughout the search efforts, we reacted to the information that we had available to us. And while we continue to send it off for deeper analysis, again, really complex operating environment for us to work in. Let me check with the experts, but there doesn't appear to be any connection between the noises and the location on the seafloor. Again, this was a catastrophic implosion of the vessel, which would have generated a significant broadband sound down there that the sonar buoys would have picked up.
This will be the last question.
Can you please say whether or not...
Can I just ask you about your comment regarding the families?
That dropped into that ocean today arrived early this morning. It seems that Swiftly was able to find out people talk about the speed of that. And also, were all of the assets involved moved as swiftly as possible to the area? And was any help turned away, as some lawmakers have criticized the government?
This was a incredibly complex operation, and we were able to mobilize an immense amount of gear to the site in just a really remarkable amount of time, given the fact that we started without any sort of vessel response plan for this or any sort of pre-stage resources. And so the equipment that was brought on site this morning that we were using was a pelagic ROV capable of operating at 6,000 meters, cameras, sonar, other articulating arms and resources on it. And it, we had to transport it here through C-17 aircraft. This is 2 aircraft that it took to get this up here. And so we've really had the right gear on site and worked as swiftly as possible to bring all of the capabilities that we had to bear to this search and rescue effort. And it was just a huge international and interagency effort to make this happen. So I'm really grateful for all of the responders that came out to support this and really search for the vessel. It is a difficult day for all of us, and it's especially difficult for the families, and our thoughts are with the families today. But this was an immense support, and we had the right gear on the bottom to find it. So thank you.
Whether or not there will be efforts made to recover.
Will you attempt to recover the bodies, the victims? Will they be recovered?
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this afternoon. There are no future planned press conferences. Updates will be shared to the USCG Northeast Twitter page, and our staff will be available to take down any questions following this. Thank you. I can get that back to you afterwards, just so I can confirm. Thank you.
The bodies of those 5 men who were on board, they're less confirmed.
All right, there you've been listening to the press conference with Rear Admiral John Mauger of the U.S. Coast Guard, and he indeed confirmed there the information that we had received in a statement just before that press conference from the company that made the submersible Titan, saying that it appears that it had suffered a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber and had suffered an implosion. So what we heard John Mauger say there is that the debris that was found is consistent with this catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. We also heard that the ROV, this remote operated vehicle that was assisting in the search this morning, this ROV was from Horizon Arctic and found the tail cone of the Titan submersible 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic. So this is on the ocean floor. And he also did add that the first thing that they did was notify the families immediately to make sure that they had understood what had happened. Our correspondent Dan Johnson was just at this press conference, just a few feet away actually from where we're standing. And Dan, listening into that press conference there, they provided a few more details about the debris that was found. Tell us more about that.
Yes, the Rear Admiral and some of his officials were able to give us more detail of exactly what it was that they have seen on the seabed this morning. He described 5 key pieces of debris. In the main, I think it's the 2 end caps of the submersible that they've been able to at least get sight of on the seabed, which have given them the confidence to say that that is the remains of the submersible, and that the way in which that debris has fallen to the seabed gives them a strong suggestion. They keep repeating that it's consistent with what they call a catastrophic implosion. That means something sudden, something shocking, something quite powerful, which presumably would have meant sudden death for those on board. And it appears that this probably happened quite early into that dive down to the wreck of the Titanic on Sunday morning. We know that communication was lost about an hour and 45 minutes after the submersible set off. We now know from the Coast Guard that the wreckage was found about 500 meters ahead of the bow of the Titanic wreck itself. So this has all the indications that the submersible was on its way down to take those 5 men to the wreckage of the Titanic when something went very badly wrong. Perhaps a leak, perhaps a catastrophic overpowering of the water pressure there, and that meant the submersible was essentially destroyed, that those 5 lives were lost very quickly, and that there was no hope actually of rescue or recovery despite the efforts that have been undertaken over the last few days. It is no doubt a sad moment for all here, for everyone involved in the deep sea exploration community who had come together to try to work for a successful outcome to this desperately sad and perplexing mystery that had troubled everyone for the last few days. But now it appears clear that actually, despite their efforts, there was no chance of rescue, and at least, who knows if it's any comfort to those who are now grieving. We can't really put ourselves in those families' position, but at least they have an answer that debris has been found, that there is some understanding of what it may have been that went wrong. But the Admiral said the work will continue. The ships that are on the surface there above the Titanic's wreck and the remote underwater vehicles that were doing that work when that debris was spotted, they will carry on building a picture, trying to find more of that debris and putting together a better idea of exactly what happened here and how those 5 lives were lost. But the Rear Admiral stated just how unforgiving the conditions are there, so deep down under the Atlantic Ocean where the weather wasn't great in the early stages of this rescue operation. We're talking about 3,800 meters at the bottom of the Atlantic. So although that work will, it sounds like, go on, it's not clear if they'll be able to find any more wreckage or add any more detail as to exactly what went wrong here, what happened. But that is an effort that will continue. But for now, everybody here absorbing the news that this is no longer a rescue mission, that it will now move into a recovery phase, that the hope of finding any survivors is lost, and thoughts turning to the families, the friends, the colleagues of those adventurers, those 5 men who went down to see the wreckage of the Titanic on Sunday morning and will not be going home to their families.
Dan, a sad moment indeed, and we did hear the Rear Admiral extending his deepest condolences to the families, and he also did say that he hoped that this provided some little bit of solace in this very difficult time to those families. He did also thank the numerous international partners who had come together to help in this effort. There were some questions Dan asked about the timing of this, whether those sonar buoys in the water, whether they might have picked up this implosion. What did the Rear Admiral say about that?
It sounds like it's early stages of that sort of investigation work, examining exactly what the timeline was here and trying to piece together a clear picture of what happened, what went wrong at what stage. And it may be that it's impossible to actually provide a precise timeline of that because of the nature of this implosion and the nature of the conditions that they are working in there. He said that the effort will continue, that there will be activity in that area for the foreseeable days to try to recover any more debris, to try to see what evidence there is, to try to build that picture. But it may actually be that now there is no hope of saving any lives, that naturally this rescue effort will move into a different phase. That probably will mean that the manpower, the equipment, the effort will reduce over the coming days, and that it may not in fact be possible to give a full picture of exactly what happened here and what went wrong. But certainly that is work that will continue, and we know that some of the companies involved, Ocean Gate and others who are involved in deep sea exploration, that have come together to work on this effort to try to work out what happened here, to try to find the submersible, they will be determined to try to get answers, because there is a broader picture here about what exactly went wrong, what standards were in place, whether this sort of deep dive exploration, essentially taking to some degree at least tourists to the wreck of the Titanic, should have been allowed in such an experimental way. There had been concerns raised, and I think there will be a broader debate about the future of this sort of exploration, but those are questions for another day. That is something to consider in the longer term. For the moment, the concern is to try to gather as much evidence as possible, and everyone here, their thoughts going to the families of the 5 men, their colleagues and their friends, some of whom we know are on those ships out above the wreckage at the moment. They have to make a very grim and upsetting journey back to land now, not having got a positive solution from this search and rescue operation. At least they have some answers, some understanding of what went wrong, and at least it does seem to be conclusive now that those 5 men have lost their lives, very sadly, in this epic search and rescue operation which has captivated people around the world. It is the magnetic pull of the Titanic that drew those 5 men there in the first place and has drawn the eyes of the world to this place and onto the press conference that's just been given here, and sadly it has the worst possible outcome.
That's right, Dan. Thank you so much for bringing us that from the press conference. And for our viewers, if you've just been joining us, indeed we have gotten the confirmation from the Coast Guard that the Titan submersible did suffer a catastrophic implosion. Thank you for watching PBS.
Sumi, thank you very much for that coverage there live, and Dan Johnson too, there, our correspondent, confirming the worst possible news, the worst outcome, that so many involved in that search operation had been hoping for a different outcome, but we do now have that confirmation that the 5 people on board have lost their lives. I want to bring in now David Meehan, oceanographer, but more importantly right now, friend of 2 of those on board. I really appreciate you being here. I know this is incredibly raw. You've been watching and receiving the news just as we have. Just want your opportunity for your thoughts right now.
Well, it's the worst possible outcome. All 5 men not being able to come home. It's what, frankly, it's what I feared when I got the first call on Monday about what had happened. Initially, that Hamish was in the sub, and that how it was lost communications, first dive, Titanic. That was not good. All of us in the deep sea, subsea community understand the risks, and when you get news like that, it hits you in the pit of your stomach, and particularly when it's a friend. And then later in the day, that PH was on board, PH Nargeolet was on board with Hamish. Then it's a double blow. I don't know Stockton Rush. He's part of my community. And then to hear that a father and a son were doing this dive on Father's Day is also gut-wrenching, isn't it? And what we're learning today in terms of what they're seeing on the seabed confirmed what a lot of us feared right from the beginning. And the only solace in any of it is that they didn't suffer for 4 days. But still, the outcome is the same. 5 men are not coming home. 5 families are devastated, and we're left questioning, you know, why did that happen?
And that will be something now for the investigation.
Yes, yeah, and your reporter Dan was spot on. The bigger issue, the broader issue now is, should these sorts of dives, taking essentially tourists down, I think of Hamish in a different way. He was an explorer and adventurer, but taking tourists down to such a remote, deep, and potentially dangerous location where if something goes wrong, the chances of somebody coming to your rescue are very, very, very small. What we saw over the past 4 days in terms of the Coast Guard response, the Navy response, the offshore community, the research vessels, was extraordinary. I never thought it would happen, that so many assets could get there so quickly, but it's all in vain. You know, we're going to learn something from that response as well. But obviously an investigation has to happen. And just to highlight how unprecedented this is, generally if there's an accident, you immediately know if a plane crashes, it's the Air Accident Investigation Branch here in the UK, or it's the FAA in America, or it's the Marine Accident Investigation Branch. Well, there is no precedent for it. So the Coast Guard Admiral was saying basically the governments have to talk to how we proceed and who takes responsibility for what should be a forensic investigation to see what went wrong.
And like you said, just highlights the unprecedented nature of this sequence of events. I just want to spend a quick moment just on your friends, if I may, for people who didn't know Hamish. What kind of man was he?
Hamish was a terrific character. He's a lovely guy, very charming, gregarious. You know, he's now being sort of billed as this British billionaire. I never knew he was a billionaire. He didn't wear that type of presence around him. And, you know, when I first met him, we got put together at a dinner with a whole group of people. And by the end of that dinner, he and I were planning an expedition together with our
set to start in just about 2 minutes, so we will get back to you. But we do want to bring in for a moment Tom Detweiler. He's an ocean explorer and ocean operations and engineering consultant. He was also a close friend of Mr. Titanic, Paul Henry, one of the 5 people that were on board this vessel. Sir, first and foremost, my condolences in hearing the news that your friend is believed to have perished in what appears to be a catastrophic accident. I'm wondering how you're feeling right now. What thoughts are going through your mind?
Well, thank you. I think all experts who know anything about this issue, this problem, had this in the back of their mind starting Sunday. It was probably the most likely event. And I think the only thing I can think about is that it was an instantaneous event and that there was no suffering, which would not have been the case had they been stuck in a very cold environment and wondering whether rescue was going to reach them or not. So there's some condolence there. The other thing is that Titanic became a very important part of PH's life, and I don't think he would consider it a necessarily bad place to be buried.
Tom, I do want to ask you to stand by for a moment. Again, we are awaiting a press briefing from the U.S. Coast Guard. We understand that they are at the podium now.
Thank you for joining us today and over
Let's
the past
listen in.
few days. This afternoon, Rear Admiral John Mauger will be providing an update on the most recent findings from ROV operations in search of the Titan submersible. He will provide a brief statement and provide the opportunity for questions after. Please limit your questions to one per outlet. Following the briefing, the Joint Information Center staff and I will be here to help you with any of your further needs. May I now please introduce Rear Admiral John Mauger.
This morning, an ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris. In consultation with experts from within the Unified Command, the debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Upon this determination, we immediately notified the families. On behalf of the United States Coast Guard and the entire Unified Command, I offer my deepest condolences to the families. I can only imagine what this has been like for them, and I hope that this discovery provides some solace during this difficult time. Additionally, we've been in close contact with the British and French consuls general to ensure that they are fully apprised and that their concerns are being addressed. The outpouring of support in this highly complex search operation has been robust and immensely appreciated. We are grateful for the rapid mobilization of experts on the undersea search and rescue, and we thank all of the agencies and personnel for their role in the response. We're also incredibly grateful for the full spectrum of international assistance that's been provided. The ROVs will remain on scene and continue to gather information. Again, our most heartfelt condolences go out to the loved ones of the crew. We'll now take questions.
John, what other debris have you found? John, what other debris have you found?
Can you talk about the delay in reporting the vessel missing and what impact that had on the recovery?
This was a incredibly complex case, and we're still working to develop the details for the timeline involved with this casualty and the response. And so we'll provide that information.
James Matthews from Sky News. John, what other debris have you found? And have you found any trace of those who were on it?
So this is an incredibly complex operating environment on the seafloor, over 2 miles beneath the surface. And so the remote operating vehicle has been searching, and it is highly capable. And we've been able to classify parts of the pressure chamber for the Titan submersible. Let me refer to one of my undersea experts here, Mr. Paul Hankin, to talk about the nature of some of the debris.
Thank you, Admiral. So essentially, we found 5 different major pieces of debris that told us that it was the remains of the Titan. The initial thing we found was the nose cone, which was outside of the pressure hull. We then found a large debris field within that large debris field, we found the front end bell of the pressure hull. That was the first indication that there was a catastrophic event. Shortly thereafter, we found a second smaller debris field. Within that debris field, we found the other end of the pressure hull, the aft end bell, which was basically comprised of the totality of that pressure vessel. We continue to map the debris field, and as the Admiral said, we will do the best we can to fully map out what's down there.
Can I ask you, Admiral, can I ask you, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
It's a very difficult question to ask, but it will be an important one for the families, of course. What are the prospects of recovering the bodies of the missing crew?
So the questions was related. I'm restating the question from the standpoint of sometimes it's hard to hear the question here. What are the prospects for recovering crew members? And so this is a incredibly unforgiving environment down there on the seafloor. And the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. And so we'll continue to work and continue to search the area down there, but I don't have an answer for prospects at this time.
Admiral, Tom Costello at NBC News. Is there any suggestion? Sorry, any suggestion at all that the sub itself collided with the wreckage of Titanic, or that instead it might have imploded above the wreckage and then rained down nearby?
So the question was, is there any question as to whether or not the sub collided with the Titanic or whether it imploded above and debris field created from that? So the location of the Titan submersible was in an area that was approximately 1,600 feet from the wreck of the Titanic. I have an expert here that is familiar with that area and can talk about the debris field and what the debris field indicates in terms of where the casualty may have occurred.
Rear Admiral, really quickly, can you tell me when that
Wait, let's
massive
get the
fleet
expert
will
voice,
be called
please.
back?
Hang on a second. The expert voice is coming up to answer the question.
Thank you, Admiral. So the question is, where does the wreck lie in relation to the Titanic? I didn't hear the Admiral's answer. I think 1,600 feet. Was that correct, Admiral?
Yep, you got it.
So that's off the bow of Titanic. It's in an area where there is not any debris of Titanic. It is a smooth bottom. To my knowledge and anything I've seen, there's no Titanic wreckage in that area. And again, 200 plus meters from the bow, and consistent with the location of last communication for an implosion in the water column. And the size of the debris field is consistent with that implosion in the water column.
Rear Admiral, if I can ask a question, in terms of the timing here, you say that this was a catastrophic implosion. And I know it's early on, but is it your estimation that this happened right at the moment when they lost contact, an hour and 45 minutes after their descent?
So the question was about the timing of the catastrophic implosion. Right now, it is too early to tell with that. We know that as we've been prosecuting this search over the course of the last 72 hours and beyond, that we've had sonar buoys in the water nearly continuously and have not detected any catastrophic events when those sonar buoys have been in the water. So.
Can you describe what happens from here, sir, in the next days and weeks?
The question was, what happens from here? What's the next? Our thoughts are with the families and making sure that they have an understanding as best as we can provide of what happened and begin to find some closure. In terms of the large process, we're going to continue to investigate the site of the debris field. And then I know that there's also a lot of questions about how, why, and when did this happen. And so, those are questions that we will collect as much information as we can on now, while the governments are meeting and discussing, what an investigation of this nature of a casualty might look like. This is something that happened. I'll just remind everybody. This is something that happened in a remote portion of the ocean with people from several different countries around the world. And so it is a complex case to work through, but I'm confident that those questions will begin to get answered.
From the UK, is there any suggestion that time factors, speed, anything could have prevented this or saved the 5 people on board, or is this quite simply a catastrophic accident?
The question was there any suggestion that time factors may have played a role or a consideration in the casualty here? And so the debris field is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. Again, while we were prosecuting the search, we had listening devices in the water throughout and did not hear any signs of catastrophic failure from those. And so we're going to continue to investigate, or we're going to continue to document the information there and understand, based on all the information we have, the timeline.
For the investigation? What does it mean for the resources required for the investigation? Which ships will be pulling out and coming in?
So the question was, what are the resources required for the investigation, and which ships will be pulling out and staying in? And so it's too early for me to talk about an investigation. That's a decision that's going to be taken outside of the search and efforts that I was leading. But we do have a number of vessels. We have 9 vessels on the scene right now. We had medical personnel on scene. We had other technicians on scene. And so we will begin to demobilize personnel and vessels from the scene over the course of the next 24 hours. But we're going to continue remote operations on the seafloor. And I don't have a timeline for when we would intend to stop remote operations on the seafloor at this point.
Admiral, as a result of this, do you think there should be changes in the way these are safety rated or inspected so that this won't happen again?
Yeah, the question was essentially about, do you think that there should be changes in safety ratings or inspection for these standards? I know that there's a lot of questions about why, how, when this happened, and the members of the Unified Command, have those questions too, as professionals and experts that work in this environment. And this is an incredibly difficult and dangerous environment to work in out there. But those questions about the regulations that apply and the standards, that's going to be, I'm sure, focus of future review. Right now, we're focused on documenting the scene and continuing the subfloor operation.
We don't know the timing here, but there was the banging noises yesterday that redirected and redeployed the ROVs to this area. Is there anything conclusive in those noises, and did that redirection and then finding this debris field today all help?
So throughout the search efforts, we reacted to the information that we had available to us. And while we continue to send it off for deeper analysis, again, really complex operating environment for us to work in. let me check with the experts, but there doesn't appear to be any connection between the noises and the location on the seafloor. Again, this was a catastrophic implosion of the vessel, which would have generated a significant broadband sound down there that the sonar buoys would have picked up.
This will be the last question.
Can I just ask you about your comment regarding the family?
That dropped into the ocean today. It arrived early this morning. It seems that Swiftly was able to find the debris field. Can you talk about the speed of that? And also, were all of the assets involved moved as swiftly as possible to the area? Was any help turned away, as some lawmakers have criticized the government?
This was a incredibly complex operation, and we were able to mobilize an immense amount of gear to the site in just a really remarkable amount of time, given the fact that we started without any sort of vessel response plan for this or any sort of pre-staged resources. And so the equipment that was brought on site this morning that we were using was a pelagic ROV capable of operating at 6,000 meters, cameras, sonar, other articulating arms and resources on it. And it, we had to transport it here through C-17 aircraft. This is 2 aircraft that it took to get this up here. And so we've really had the right gear on site and worked as swiftly as possible to bring all of the capabilities that we had to bear to this search and rescue effort. And it was just a huge international and interagency effort to make this happen. So I'm really grateful for all of the responders that came out to support this and really search for the vessel. It is a difficult day for all of us, and it's especially difficult for the families, and our thoughts are with the families today. But this was an immense support, and we had the right gear on the bottom to find it. So thank you.
Will you attempt to recover the bodies, can we ask you, the victims, will they be recovered?
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this afternoon. There are no future planned press conferences. Updates will be shared to the USCG Northeast Twitter page, and our staff will be available to take it down.
We've been listening to an update from U.S. Coast Guard Rear Admiral John Mauger, an important update, a definitive one, and ultimately a sad one. He says that the debris that they have discovered just several hundred yards off the bow of the Titanic on the sea floor is consistent, in his words, with a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber of the missing submersible. He went on to detail that there were actually 2 debris fields, and in each debris field that they found on the ocean floor, they found pieces of that pressure hull no longer intact, the pressure hull containing the passenger compartment there, and that leading to the conclusion that it was a loss of all 5 of those lives on board. Pictures there, Hamish Harding, Paul-Henri Nargolet, Stockton Rush, as well as Suleiman Dawood and Shahzada Dawood. Other updates, they said it's too early to tell the timeline of exactly when this catastrophic loss happened. Also notably, the Rear Admiral there saying it does not appear to be any connection between those noises, which had been interpreted as possibly banging noises, no connection between those noises and the location of where they found that debris field on the bottom of the ocean floor. Our Miguel Marquez has been following this from Newfoundland. As I was saying, a definitive word there, a sad word from those folks who've been working so hard with the hope, at least, of finding someone alive.
Yeah, definitive and catastrophic. You know, they lost communications an hour and 45 minutes into the dive. There was hope that because they heard nothing, the absence of information meant that they were possibly still alive. And then there was the possible banging and these noises that they were hearing, that they were trying to decipher what those were. But to hear the description from the press conference today, to talk to the folks who we've been talking to at Ocean Gate, it is clear that as they were descending, there was a catastrophic event. An implosion of that capsule is how they put it at the press conference, and then the pieces of the Titan sank to the very front of the Titanic. The nose cone was found in one area, the back end was found in another area, separated from some distance. It is not clear how much of the capsule itself, or if any of the bodies of the victims, will be able to be recovered because of the nature of the depth, the pressure, and just how catastrophic this event was. But so much hope here. I mean, just standing here in St. John's, and as this news broke, people from St. John's coming down to the park where all this media has set up, and just sort of a shared moment of sadness for the families, for the hope that they had. You know, this is the place. If you want to go to the Titanic and research the Titanic and dive down there and be involved in that community, this is the place it happens, because it's the closest spot on Earth to the very distant ocean, 460 miles from here or so. So it's a place that everybody has pictures of James Cameron when he was here. Everybody sort of shares the mystique of the Titanic here. And to have this happen, 1912, the Titanic went down. In 1923, more were lost at the very bow of the Titanic. Jim?
Well, as you note there, it raises the possibility that this happened very early on in the search process, this catastrophic failure, although when he was asked about that, Rear Admiral Mauger said they're still working on the details of the timeline there. Miguel Marquez, thanks so much in St. John's, Newfoundland. We also have Jason Carroll, who's been following the story. And Jason, you were there as we received that update from the Coast Guard. And as you know, he was asked more than once about will there be an attempt to recover human remains. And he said more than once that these are just extremely difficult conditions. And he also mentioned that they're going to begin to demobilize some of the assets that have been sent out there with the hope that they might find someone alive. What other questions are still unanswered at this point?
Right, they're going to leave some of those remotely operated vehicles, at that site. But in addition to that, as you heard the Rear Admiral say not a short while ago, they will begin to demobilize some of their assets over the next 48 hours. At one point during the briefing, I did specifically ask the Rear Admiral, after he described this as a catastrophic implosion, about timing, because you remember when the Titan began its descent early Sunday morning, it was about 1 hour and 45 minutes into its descent when all of a sudden it lost contact with the surface ship. And so I asked him, do they believe that this quote-unquote catastrophic implosion happened at that moment? He couldn't give a definitive answer. There needs to be more investigation into that. But what I can tell you is he also said that they had dropped sonar buoys all throughout that particular area. And the sonar buoys, he said, did not pick up any sounds that would indicate some type of catastrophic implosion, at least at that time. So that seems to suggest, again, I caution, the investigation now underway, but that seems to suggest that this catastrophic implosion may have occurred at that particular moment. A little bit more very quickly, if I may, about the debris that they found. And again, the debris found by that ROV, that remotely operated vehicle, the tail cone found about 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the ocean floor. In addition to that, they also found 5 different pieces in what they described as a large debris field, including the front of the pressure hull, and then a second smaller debris field where they found the other end of the hull. And of course, there was the statement he made for the families. He said, I can only imagine what this has been like for them. And he also said that he hoped that this provided some sort of solace for those during this very, very difficult time. So now the questions begin. What happened? Could it have been prevented? These are just some of the questions that will now continue as this investigation gets underway.
To the sounds that have been heard, he also made the point that those sounds that had been detected recently during the search that had been interpreted as possibly being a banging noise, perhaps from inside, he now said it is their sense that those were not connected given the location of where the debris field found and where those sounds were heard. Jason Carroll, thanks so much. And Boris, we should know there's been a lot of highly capable equipment that was deployed in this search, highly sensitive sonar equipment designed to listen underwater, to listen for things like that. And in terms of when this might happen, they certainly would have heard a catastrophic loss of this given the sound it would have generated. That raises the possibility it happened before all those assets were deployed to listen for this missing sub. But again, that timeline, as they said in this press conference, is something they still got to work out. A lot of details in the timeline they got to work out, Boris.
Yeah, no question about that. There is, as noted in the press briefing, at least 2 debris fields that they are combing through right now to gather evidence. In the meantime, I want to bring back in Tom Detweiler. He's someone who has not only a personal connection to someone that was on board this vessel, but to the Titanic wreckage itself. He's an ocean explorer and ocean operations and engineering consultant. He was also a close friend of Paul-Henri Nargeolet. Tom, you were part of the team that discovered the Titanic wreckage initially when it was found back in the 1980s, and you were close to Paul-Henri, as I understand it, someone who often visited that site. He was known as Mr. Titanic. He had been down there more than 30 times. Now that you are hearing the news that he was apparently lost in this catastrophic implosion, I'm wondering what you want the world to remember about your friend.
Well, PH had a just incredible career, starting as a distinguished naval officer, working in many of the French programs for undersea exploration, working in other programs such as the RMS Titanic program and doing all the exploration using the mirrors of the Titanic, and then continuing with OceanGate to do as an expert on the site when they went down. I spent lots of hours talking with PH about how the Titanic was changing over the years. It was very interesting. I actually had to go to court down when the rights to the Titanic for the RMS Titanic were challenged, and the government was trying to take the rights away. I had to go down and testify on behalf of the RMS Titanic and testify to the expertise of PH. And once I told a little bit about PH, there was no question in the court's mind that RMS Titanic should retain the rights. He was just an incredible person, very professional all the time, but yet just an incredibly likable person. Everybody who knew PH loved him. And I think, as you've probably seen over the last few days, there were a lot of people who knew PH and highly respected him. He's just one of those figures that stood out in the entire industry.
And again, we are so sorry for your loss, our deepest sympathies. It is notable to me that he passed apparently doing something that he loved. Can you talk about the attraction that folks like you and he have for this wreckage of the Titanic and what it means to you and to people like him to see it in person?
Well, I think he specialized in Titanic just because he had the opportunities to, but all of us have had opportunities like the Titanic, and they're all very exciting to us. It's really the spirit of adventure. It's finding something new. It's seeing something that hasn't been seen by people before or hasn't been seen for maybe 100 years. It's, there is a risk taking involved. I would have to admit we probably are all a little bit of risk takers, but we like to say we manage the risks. And so, we're not being stupid with our lives. We are managing the risks and doing everything we can to keep it safe. But we all know that something like this could happen at some point. Failures do happen when you're going to these extremes.
Tom, I do want to share with you a statement that we've recently gotten from OceanGate, the operator of the Titan vessel. They say, quote, "These men were true explorers who shared a distinct spirit of adventure and a deep passion for exploring and protecting the world's oceans. Our hearts are with these 5 souls and every member of their families during this tragic time. They go on to say, quote, "The entire OceanGate family is deeply grateful for the countless men and women from multiple organizations of the international community who expedited wide-ranging resources and have worked so very hard on this mission." Tom, there are inevitably going to be questions, as some have come up already, about regulations and about safety standards. The Coast Guard was asked during the press briefing. What questions might you have at this point as we learn of this tragic ending to your friend's story?
Well, the other submersible operations that I've worked with all have relationships with a classification society. And that society, there's several of them that will classify submarines. And they all have rules that you have to follow to guarantee that the submarine is tested periodically and is safe, and every so often it has to be completely torn apart, everything inspected. And those submersible operations have operated for decades with a really fine safety record. Now this submarine, from what I understand, was not classified, and there may be reasons for that, but I think we need to look, were there things that they didn't do because they weren't inspected by an outside agency? Were there shortcuts taken? All of that's got to be looked at, and certainly that will trickle down to anybody else that is looking to do a private sort of venture like this. I think it's very comparable to what's going on in the space program right now. Are making great strides in the space program through privatization of some of it, but at the same time, are those programs as safe as, say, the government-run programs? So I think we have to work that out. We certainly don't want to stop the entrepreneurial developments, because quite often they develop technologies that are major steps because they're not hindered by the regulations. So we need to find where that line is, where we can allow them to be somewhat unregulated, but at the same time not sacrifice safety.
As you noted, it requires risk to have innovation. And Tom, I am curious about another aspect of this. The Coast Guard shared that it may be very difficult to find any remains, in part because of the unforgiving conditions down there, the fact that this was an instantaneous catastrophic event. I'm wondering, as you well know with your friend PH, what your message might be to his family and to the families of the others on board at this difficult time when it's unclear what they might get back from their family members.
A really well-known marine archaeologist, marine architect, who was British. His name was Robin Williams, who has since passed away, but he was well known for investigating shipwrecks. And when we looked at another submarine which had a catastrophic implosion after a failure, that was the Israeli submarine Dakar, he put it very well. He said, for the crew, it was just like a light switch was switched off.
Wow.
They didn't even realize what was happening. They didn't suffer. And, PH was doing something that he truly, truly loved. And, it just ended.
At least there is some solace, as you said, that it was likely there was no suffering for PH and the others on board. Tom Detweiler, we are so grateful for you sharing insights not only into your friend, but into the mission and what drives folks to this wreckage site. Our deepest condolences. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Of course. We do also want to bring in now CNN Pentagon correspondent Oren Lieberman, because Oren, you have been tracking what may come next in this recovery effort. We obviously heard the Coast Guard talking about gathering evidence and surveying the site in order to conduct a thorough investigation. What are you learning?
So if there is an attempt to try to salvage some of the debris to carry out that investigation, or if there is a desire from any of the family members of those who perished in this horrific tragedy to recover something from the debris field. That would likely be done by the Navy Flyaway Deep Ocean Salvage System, known as a FADOS. That's been on site in St. John's, Newfoundland for about the last day or so. But even this comes with its own timeline. First, the Navy has to find a ship. As of yesterday, a Navy official said they'd been in talks with a ship, but hadn't yet put it under contract. Now, it may be easier now to find a ship to place under contract. As some of the ships leave the search site, some may return to St. John's and you may have a ship available. Even then, it takes 24 hours to weld and secure this recovery system to a ship. Then the time it takes to get it out to the site. It doesn't operate independently. The Navy official said you actually need a remotely operated vehicle to take the cable down, presumably to secure it to the debris that you want to bring back up. And all of that takes its own time and its own process. But if there is a decision to pursue the investigation in that direction, that is, to bring something up to investigate it more closely, that is what that process may look like. Now, Boris, I suspect, and this is certainly a bit of speculation, that before that decision is made, there would be some very difficult conversations with the family members of those who lost loved ones in this horrific tragedy, if they even want to go down that direction, because it is obviously a very difficult decision to make and a difficult and complex operation to carry out, just given the environment, of course.
Yeah, of course, it should be conducted with the family's consultation. Oren Lieberman from the Pentagon, thank you so much. Jim, obviously a lot of questions to answer, many of them surrounding exactly what caused this implosion.
And of course, what happened at the moment of loss, which, as we heard the Coast Guard described as a catastrophic failure of the pressure hull. Joining me now is Tom Foreman. So based on what we learned a lot in that press conference about what happened here. If we could put up a picture of the submersible itself, the headline seems to be they found these, in fact, 2 debris fields, and the debris field showed pieces of the pressure hull, which is a capsule, sort of, if you picture like a medicine capsules shaped object in the midst of the larger object there. Catastrophic means implosion at those depths.
Yeah, it
what does that tell
does.
you?
Well, you know, you wonder when you hear about something like this, you say, if you haven't found the bodies, if you haven't seen the details, how do you know?
Yeah.
Here's how they know, because of what they found. If you look at this diagram here, or any other one we want to bring up here, you see on the left over there where it says Ocean Gate, they said that was the first thing they found with part of the tail section
This
right
lets
there.
this lets you see what is
Gate.
actually the pressure hull, and that is the capsule-sized piece.
That's the red part
inside
there, right,
it, yes.
with the people inside of it, right? So first of all, they found that covering on the back there that says Ocean Gate Titan, based on what they said, or a portion of it. The second thing they said they found was the right side over here, which is the cap, where you see where it says viewing port and titanium cap over there. That was the second part they had, and then the third part was the back end, the little bubble structure on the back end. That's why they know, without finding anything else. Once those are gone, there's no survivability in there.
So, since there were 2 debris fields, it said one larger one smaller one, but in each debris field, pieces of the pressure capsule.
Right.
I have to imagine then you're describing them getting blown apart. I mean, it's an implosion given the pressure.
And depending on where it happened, you don't know how they went down. Did they drop directly? Did they flutter somewhat?
So it didn't necessarily have to happen on the floor. It could have happened higher up and then floated down.
Could have happened higher up. I will say this, the questions that you have to ask, that any engineer is going to ask first, in the first place they're going to look at that window up front. There were questions about that. I have to say, I'm not an expert in this. I was surprised the first time I saw it, the size of the window. Because
bigger than you expected.
A lot of deep submersibles seem to have much smaller windows than that. Nonetheless, when you have a bigger space like that, there was a question about that. And the seams, where that titanium joined into the carbon fiber tube, front and back, and there were questions about that whole idea. That was part of the experimental nature of this.
Well, beyond the seams, there was question about the material itself. The carbon fiber, we had an expert on the air, in fact, earlier in this broadcast, who described concerns about fatigue over time because this submersible had been down multiple times, and the question was, in fact, it hadn't been tested for that many submersions. Was it weakening over time? Again, this is a question we just want to acknowledge throughout here that even the Coast Guard saying they're going to learn the answer to these questions over time, but we should note that is a question that multiple engineers have raised about this particular design.
And they weren't just talking about the tube, they were actually talking, as you mentioned, about the material itself. Carbon fiber is considered very resilient. In some ways, there are those who consider it less prone to fatigue than, for example, steel might be. But there are so many variables in that, and the question is, when you stress it over and over again, do you reach a breaking point in this? This is one of the reasons why in typical engineering, you would re-engineer this after it had been, or at least rebuild it after it had been stressed badly.
And it's one reason why there is incentive to pick up the pieces, in effect, to
100%.
to learn what happened here, because carbon fiber, as folks probably at home know, is being used in a whole host of applications now. Cars, also airplanes. The 787, you want to know how these things respond to stresses.
You're completely right about that. Every piece you can gather from this, look, there is, of course, the human and the sentimental side and the very real side of wanting to know really what happened to these people. I think your guest a moment ago said it well. It was probably like turning a light switch. At this depth, it would be a type of explosion in a sense. It would be so, and by that I mean the speed and force of it. But every piece you bring up out of there is going to tell you something possibly about where did the failure originate, how did it originate, and how did it progress through here, even if it took a fraction of a second.
And when, right?
Exactly.
In fact, the Coast Guard have also mentioned that they're going to firm up the timeline here. They did note that this would caused quite a loud noise underwater. They had a lot of assets there that were listening underwater as they were searching for this, assets that would have, had they been there when this took place, heard an implosion, I should say, of that side. They would have heard it, so it does raise the possibility, and again, the possibility, we don't know yet, that this took place early on.
When you have to go back and look at all of the records from on board the ship itself at the time that this was lowering down, and from anything else that might have been in the area that may not have noticed it at the time. You could have had anybody using sonar equipment at some distance that maybe recorded something that in the moment seemed like a blip, seemed like nothing.
You roll back the tape.
But now you go back and you say, wait a minute, you were over here and you did see some, you heard some tiny little something, maybe that means something.
So let me ask you another question. Earlier in this broadcast, we were speaking about the difficulty of recovering people alive from this depth. Fact is, it's never happened before. I mean, the greatest depth you mentioned was like about 1,000 feet down, so maybe a tenth of this distance. The Coast Guard was asked, will they make an attempt to retrieve human remains? An unanswerable question. The Coast Guard Rear Admiral noted the extremely difficult conditions there. Is that possible? I mean, the submersibles have the ability, as I understand it, to pick up something from there.
They have the ability. The question is, again, I want to remind what we said earlier on. Remember, this is dark, dark, dark down there. There's no hope. Everything is going to have to be found, individually, and that would include any remains. I don't mean to be disrespectful to speak of it that way, but it's every move you make down there is going to be a bit of a challenge in the same sense that every ounce you send into space matters. That's why they're so careful about the weight of things going into space. Everything you retrieve from this level of the ocean matters because you are taking risk, you're expending time and energy, and it's very hard to do. The question is, what is the proper and best way to go about this for everyone involved?
Let's acknowledge the extreme sensitivity, and no one with greater or stronger feelings about this than the families involved. It may also be a decision for the families.
Sure, and can it be done? Technically, can it be done? Theoretically, it can be. We don't know the state of the entire situation. Theoretically, it can be done. Practically, will it be done is a different question.
Well, listen, as always, I think we need to acknowledge what we know and don't know at this point. We learned a lot, and the sad, definitive answer that they now believe it was a catastrophic loss of the pressure hull of the submarine, and therefore a loss of all 5 on board. These other questions about timeline, etc., were there weaknesses in the structure, the design, things we'll learn over time.
And it's important to know when we talk about catastrophic failure, with this much pressure on a vessel like that, that catastrophic failure could truly start with no more than a pinprick. The smallest little failure under this circumstance, as one submariner told me the other day, there is no such thing as a small leak at this level.
Right.
Any leak is potentially catastrophic because it's not a leak. It's not really a leak. It's a failure in the integrity of the system, and that's the problem.
Well, goodness, Tom Foreman, thanks so much for helping us answer some of these questions. Again, Boris, my heart, as I know yours does, and our whole team goes out to the families who are receiving this news, as we have been in the last hour, and they're the ones who have the most to bear at this point.
Absolutely, Jim. And as we look forward to getting answers to what happened and what led to this catastrophic failure, I want to go to Paula Newton, who's live for us in Halifax, Nova Scotia, because we also have to ask about what comes next for the families of the folks that were on board this vessel. Paula, have we heard any more from them?
We haven't heard any more from them, but they obviously had clues leading up to this press conference, and they had already been notified and had started to notify their own families and friends. I just want to pick up, though, where Jim and Tom left off. We were talking about the robust international response, and I know that gave great comfort to the family and the friends of those involved in this horrific incident. And now that they do have all those assets in place, this will be a very good starting point from which to collect the debris, to start that investigation. As he said there, those remote operated vehicles will remain, in fact, there on the scene to collect as much debris as they can. And of course, that question family members want to know, can the remains of their loved ones be retrieved? We certainly don't know the answer to that, but Boris, you did hear the U.S. Coast Guard say, look, this is an unforgiving environment, and that had been a catastrophic event. Obviously, they're still assessing the situation, but, retrieving human remains at this point would be difficult, but the remote controlled vehicles are still down there, and they will continue to be down there for hours more. I also want to pick up on the fact that as this investigation continues, we talk about what they had on the scene there, and this will be very important in terms of evaluating what happens with this kind of exploration. We have private companies, certainly many of them trying to go to space and launching things in space, including space tours. So what will it take in this kind of exploration to the deep seas? What is safe? What should be regulated? That is certainly a cause for concern for Canadian officials. This entire operation was launched from St. John's, Newfoundland, and so they want to know. It was launched off their waters. What do they need to know for next time? What do they need to be inspecting? What do they want to make sure is on board, can happen, is possible? Again, Stockton Rush himself and Ocean Gate Expeditions included the fact that this was experimental, and they were adventurers, they were explorers, they wanted this to happen, they wanted to stretch the limits, and yet there is concern among many now to understand exactly what was that catastrophic event, what happened, if we want to continue to do this kind of exploration, and if private companies want to continue to do this exploration, what do we know so that we can keep people safe in the future? All questions they'll be asking right now. And at this hour, again, the retrieval of that debris continuing on that sea floor by the Titanic wreck, and they'll be trying to bring up as many, take a look at and trying to bring up as much of that debris as they can. Boris?
Paula, you noted the international effort and the work that has come in from different countries and different agencies to aid in this process. During the press briefing, we got confirmation from the Coast Guard that they were going to begin within the next 48 hours to lighten their footprint there. I'm wondering, in your conversations with Canadian officials, if they've yet to give any indication as to what their plans are over the next 48 to 72 hours.
So they told me they are waiting for instructions from the U.S. Coast Guard, but that the kinds of personnel and ships that will be moved first are things like HMCS Glace Bay, right, which I was talking about before. That's the medical personnel that were on board there to deal with any survivors. Again, I'll say it, a robust international response. I think the U.S. Coast Guard was able to muster the resources that they could, and that included being ready for survivors if they came off of that Titan, and being able to immediately put them in a medical bay on a ship there in the North Atlantic and really cater to their every medical need. Obviously, they will be moving on. Again, when we're talking about the aircraft that was in the air, they will be moving on as well. What is most important now is things like the John Cabot, which was doing the side scanning mapping of the seafloor bed. That may still be necessary, but obviously most necessary are those remote operated vehicles that are still there this hour. But certainly Canadian officials, taking the lead from the U.S. Coast Guard and understanding exactly what can go and what needs to stay. Again, the resources are there. There is no reason not to continue now with that recovery and salvage operation, which needs to go ahead for that investigation to continue. And of course, ever present here for all of these officials were the family and friends who were waiting for word, and they will try and deal with the issue of whether or not remains can be brought up to the surface as delicately as they can with these families, and will be the first to be informed as to whether or not that's even possible.
Yeah, an extremely difficult process. Paula Newton, thank you so much for the reporting. Jim.
Well, we have spent a good deal of time today speaking about, at first, the extensive efforts to find the missing submersible, and now, of course, the news of the catastrophic loss of the submersible and all those on board. So let's take a moment now to share what we've learned about the 5 people who perished in this tragedy. Stockton Rush was the pilot and the head of OceanGate, the company behind it all. Rush said he originally wanted to be an astronaut after graduating from Princeton, but his eyesight was never good enough. Instead, he set his sights then on the sea. He founded OceanGate in 2009 with the belief that our oceans, not space, are the key to human survival. Rush's wife is, we should note, reportedly the great-great-granddaughter of 2 of the Titanic's most well-known victims. Paul-Henri Nargeolet was a French deep-sea explorer and the director of underwater research for RMS Titanic. That is the company that owns the salvage rights to the famous wreck. Nargeolet had dived to the wreckage more than 30 times, the first time back in 1987, just 2 years after the long-lost Titanic was found.
Nobody's been to the Titanic more than this man. He's absolutely passionate about it. And the great thing is he's humble and kind. He's not arrogant like some of the folks in this business. You know, he's a true gentleman explorer.
A spokesperson for the Nargeolet family tells CNN, quote, "When I talk to Paul-Henri, I can still see his childlike eyes shining because this legendary liner has also become his story." British entrepreneur Hamish Harding was also on board and was said to be very excited about this expedition. Harding had traveled around the world already, as high as space and as deep as the Mariana Trench, which is much deeper, in fact, than where the Titanic rests. His family called him the ultimate explorer.
Hamish is larger than life. He lives exploration. He is an explorer to the core of his soul.
Hamish, as I describe him, is the quintessential British explorer. He loves exploring. He's a pilot. He's done all kinds of different adventures, been to the South Pole, been to the Marianas Trench. So this is the kind of thing that we would talk about, you know, when we were hanging out.
And finally, a father and son were on board. Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood, both on board. Their family has asked for privacy. We do know they lived in the UK. Shahzada was said to be a longtime supporter of the Prince's Trust International and the British Asian Trust. The palace says King Charles had asked for updates on the search. His son, 19-year-old Suleiman, was a university student in Glasgow. 5 lives lost. Boris.
CNN's Gabe Cohen is with us now. Gabe, you actually got a chance to interview Stockton Rush several years ago when you were reporting in Seattle. You also were on board this vessel, so you're familiar with OceanGate, and you also spoke with a co-founder of the company. As we learned the breaking news earlier today, what did they share with you?
Yeah, so I actually just got off the phone with Guillermo Sondland. He is a co-founder of OceanGate, founded more than a decade ago with Stockton Rush, who was obviously lost in this tragedy. I want to read a little bit of what he told me, again, just a minute ago. He said, this is a tragic loss for the families, for the ocean exploration community in general. All 5 crew members were passionate explorers, and they died doing what they believed in. Those of us in the community that work at that depth know this is always a risk. There's pressure down there. It is so intense. If there's a failure, it is an instant, catastrophic failure, and we all know that it's a risk for better or for worse. I asked him also, given some of the safety concerns that have come out over the past couple of days, if he stands by the effort that they had at this company, the work that they did. And he said he stands by Stockton Rush 150%, that Stockton Rush was not a risk taker, he said. He said he was a risk manager. Obviously, there are those concerns that have been raised by a couple former employees who have questioned whether or not this hole really was as safe as it should be. There are those who said it should have been certified as well. But Guillermo Sondland says that they were innovators and that he would have made this dive. He tried to. He hadn't done it before. He was planning on it maybe in the next couple of years. But he told me a story about Stockton Rush saying that when this vessel was completed, the first depth dive they did, Stockton Rush did alone because he didn't want to put anyone else at risk. And obviously, he believed in this vessel. Right. He was inside of it. But he said that, Guillermo Sondland said he told Stockton Rush he would have made that first dive with him. He believed in the product. He believed in the vision that much. But Stockton Rush said no, and he did it alone.
And I understand that in your conversations with Stockton Rush, he also spoke to you about the thrill of exploration and his desire to innovate and to do something different. I'm wondering how that sticks with you now personally, having had that conversation with him and now seeing ultimately that it led to his demise.
It's obviously difficult, having interviewed him several times and having been to the Ocean Gate headquarters. We saw that vision firsthand, and it wasn't just Titan. It was the previous vessels, Cyclops before that. They went on multiple expeditions. They went to Titanic. They went to Andrea Doria. They went to these famous shipwrecks. And you're right, Stockton Rush spoke very passionately. He clearly believed in this. Yes, there was the tourism side of things, that they were bringing down these mission specialists who were paying a lot of money to go on these trips. But they talked about mapping these shipwrecks, which they did do. They had these sonar cameras, laser cameras on board, and they talked about the science and understanding more about shipwrecks and understanding about their impact on the ocean while they still exist. So that is difficult, knowing what we saw firsthand 5-6 years ago and now what's happened.
He perished, as did the other passengers doing what they loved. Gabe Cohen, thank you so much for sharing that perspective with us. Jim?
We do want to go back to Miguel Marquez. He's in St. John's, Newfoundland. Been following the stories. We've received these updates. Miguel, do you hear me there? As we wait for Miguel to dial in, we'll get those comms sorted out. The breaking news remains catastrophic loss, says the Coast Guard, of the pressure hull of the Titan, and it is presumed that all 5 on board have been lost. Please stay with us. We'll be back after a short break.
CNN News Central, brought to you by A Place for Mom, the place for senior living advice. Talk to an expert advisor today at no cost to your family.
It's really been a gift having Mom live with us. But as a nurse, my training told me she needed more help than I could provide. So I connected with A Place for Mom. My senior living advisor understood our unique situation. She quickly recommended communities and set up tours. A Place for Mom helped us get to a decision. And now, Mom is so well cared for.
Talk to an expert senior living advisor today at no cost to your family.
Back when I had a working circulatory system, you had to give your right arm to find great talent. But with Upwork, there's highly skilled talent from all over the globe, right at your fingertips. This is how we work now.
Hey, you know it doesn't have to be this way, right? Juniper's industry-leading AI automatically sets up thousands of secure SD-WAN connections in minutes, so you don't have to bend over backwards.
I see no downside.
Led by the Coast Guard, and in the case of the Kurtz, it was dealing with NATO off the coast of Norway. And under the Russian submarine, it was a Saturday morning. I remember Secretary Cohen directed us to deploy the deep submersible from Norfolk. So you got to get the deep submersible moving and then move by Air Force.
Larry, I know we have you back, and there will be many questions and have been questions raised about folks who do this kind of exploration in spite of the danger. If you want to speak to PH, but also to the others who have done this and why they do it and the importance in your mind of them doing it, what would you say?
Well, like, you know, PH was a mentor to me, a good friend over, you know, almost 25 years. I did my first expedition logistics working on the gate right here in St. John's Harbour in 1998. And, you know, I just want people to know how good a man he was. I'm sure that's obvious. I mean, obviously, the Titanic. You know, but going forward, you know, I just, you know, I just feel so bad. I don't really know what to say. It's just, like I said, I'm just trying to process all this now, and it's just a bad feeling, and you know, it's just sad.
It is indeed a sad time. Larry Daly, we are very sorry for your loss, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. General Honoré, thanks to you as well. Again, the breaking news, the confirmation that the 5 lives aboard the Titan have been lost. That's going to do it for us this hour. Up next, my colleague Katie Tur has more breaking coverage of the search for the missing sub that again has resulted in the finding that it is lost. And the Coast Guard press conference any minute.
Chris, thank you very much. The Coast Guard press conference is beginning right now. This is Rear Admiral John Mauger of the U.S. Coast Guard. Let us listen.
This morning, an ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris. In consultation with experts from within the Unified Command, the debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Upon this determination, we immediately notified the families. On behalf of the United States Coast Guard and the entire Unified Command, I offer my deepest condolences to the families. I can only imagine what this has been like for them, and I hope that this discovery provides some solace during this difficult time. Additionally, we've been in close contact with the British and French consuls general to ensure that they are fully apprised and that their concerns are being addressed. The outpouring of support in this highly complex search operation has been robust and immensely appreciated. We are grateful for the rapid mobilization of experts on the undersea search and rescue, and we thank all of the agencies and personnel for their role in the response. We're also incredibly grateful for the full spectrum of international assistance that's been provided. The ROVs will remain on scene and continue to gather information. Again, our most heartfelt condolences go out to the loved ones of the crew. We'll now take questions.
Can you talk about delay in reporting the vessel missing and what impact that had?
This was a incredibly complex case, and we're still working to develop the details for the timeline involved with this casualty and the response. And so we'll provide that information.
Recovery of the body. James Matthews from Sky News. John, what other debris have you found? And have you found any trace of those who were on?
So this is an incredibly complex operating environment on the seafloor, over 2 miles beneath the surface. And so the remote operating vehicle has been searching, and it is highly capable. And we've been able to classify parts of the pressure chamber for the Titan submersible. Let me refer to one of my undersea experts here, Mr. Paul Hankin, to talk about the nature of some of the debris.
Thank you, Admiral. So essentially, we found 5 different major pieces of debris that told us that it was the remains of the Titan. The initial thing we found was the nose cone, which was outside of the pressure hull. We then found a large debris field. Within that large debris field, we found the front end bell of the pressure hull. That was the first indication that there was a catastrophic event. Shortly thereafter, we found a second smaller debris field. Within that debris field, we found the other end of the pressure hull, the aft end bell, which was basically comprised of the totality of that pressure vessel. We continue to map the debris field, and as the Admiral said, we will do the best we can to fully map out what's down there.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
It's a very difficult question to ask, but it would be an important one for the families, of course. What are the prospects of recovering the bodies of this thing?
So the questions was related. I'm restating the question from the standpoint of sometimes it's hard to hear the question here. What are the prospects for recovering crew members? And so this is a incredibly unforgiving environment down there on the seafloor. And the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. And so we'll continue to work and continue to search the area down there, but I don't have an answer for prospects at this time.
Admiral Tom Costello at NBC News, is there any suggestion, any suggestion at all that the sub itself collided with the wreckage of Titanic, or that instead it might have imploded above the wreckage and then rained down nearby?
So the question was, is there any question as to whether or not the sub collided with the Titanic or whether it imploded above and debris field created from that? So the location of the Titan submersible was in an area that was approximately 1,600 feet from the wreck of the Titanic. I have an expert here that is familiar with that area and can talk about the debris field and what the debris field indicates in terms of where the casualty may have occurred.
Rear Admiral, really quickly, can you tell me when that...
Wait, let's get the expert voice, please. Hang on a second. The expert voice is coming up to answer the question.
Thank you, Admiral. So the question is, where does the wreck lie in relation to the Titanic? I didn't hear the Admiral's answer. I think 1,600 feet. Was that correct, Admiral?
Yep, you got it.
So that's off the bow of Titanic. It's in an area where there is not any debris of Titanic. It is a smooth bottom. To my knowledge and anything I've seen, there's no Titanic wreckage in that area. And again, 200 plus meters from the bow, and consistent with the location of last communication for an implosion in the water column. And the size of the debris field is consistent with that implosion in the water column.
Thanks.
Well, if I can ask you a question, in terms of the timing here, you say that this was a catastrophic implosion. And I know it's early on, but is it your estimation that this happened right at the moment when they lost contact, an hour and 45 minutes after their descent?
So the question was about the timing of the catastrophic implosion. Right now, it is too early to tell with that. We know that as we've been prosecuting this search over the course of the last 72 hours and beyond, that we've had sonar buoys in the water nearly continuously and have not detected any catastrophic events when those sonar buoys have been in the water. So.
Can you describe what happens from here, sir, in the next days and weeks in terms of finding any more debris? What happens from here?
So we will, the question was, what happens from here? What's the next phase? And so right now, again, our thoughts are with the families and making sure that they have an understanding as best as we can provide of what happened and begin to find some closure. In terms of the large process, we're going to continue to investigate the site of the debris field. And then I know that there's also a lot of questions about how, why, and when did this happen. And so, you know, those are questions that we will collect as much information as we can on now, while the governments are meeting and discussing, you know, what an investigation of this nature of a casualty might look like. This is something that happened. I'll just remind everybody. This is something that happened in a remote portion of the ocean with people from several different countries around the world. And so it is a complex case to work through, but I'm confident that those questions will begin to get answered.
Will the Coast Guard lead the investigation, sir?
From the UK, is there any suggestion that time factors, speed, anything could have prevented this or saved the 5 people on board, or is this quite simply a catastrophic accident?
The question was there any suggestion that time factors may have played a role or consideration in the casualty here? And so the debris field is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. Again, while we were prosecuting the search, we had listening devices in the water throughout and did not hear any signs of catastrophic failure from those. And so we're going to continue to investigate, or we're going to continue to document the information there and understand, based on all the information we have, the timeline.
What does this mean for the resources required for the investigation? Which ships will be spilling out and coming in?
So the question was, what are the resources required for the investigation, and which ships will be pulling out and staying in? And so it's too early for me to talk about an investigation. That's a decision that's going to be taken outside of the search and efforts that I was leading. But we do have a number of vessels. We have 9 vessels on the scene right now. We had medical personnel on scene. We had other technicians on scene. And so we will begin to demobilize personnel and vessels from the scene over the course of the next 24 hours. But we're going to continue remote operations on the seafloor. And I don't have a timeline for when we would intend to stop remote operations on the seafloor at this point.
As a result of this, do you think there should be changes in the way these are safety rated or inspected so that this won't happen again?
Yeah, the question was essentially about, do you think that there should be changes in safety ratings or inspection for these standards? I know that there's a lot of questions about why, how, when this happened, and the members of the Unified Command, have those questions too, as professionals and experts that work in this environment. And this is an incredibly difficult and dangerous environment to work in out there. But those questions about the regulations that apply and the standards, that's going to be, I'm sure, focus of future review. Right now, we're focused on documenting the scene and continuing the subfloor.
I know we don't know the timing here. We don't know the timing here, but there was the banging noises yesterday that redirected and redeployed the ROVs to this area. Is there anything conclusive in those noises, and did that redirection and then finding this debris field today all help?
So throughout the search efforts, we reacted to the information that we had available to us. And while we continue to send it off for deeper analysis, again, really complex operating environment for us to work in. Let me check with the experts, but there doesn't appear to be any connection between the noises and the location on the seafloor. Again, this was a catastrophic implosion of the vessel, which would have generated a significant broadband sound down there that the sonar buoys would have picked up.
Admiral, a lot of questions about who might be.
Admiral, you mentioned closure for the family. Admiral, can I just ask you about your comment regarding the families?
It dropped into the ocean today. It arrived early this morning. It seems that Swiftly was able to find it. We're talking about the speed of that. And also, were all of the assets involved moved as swiftly as possible to the area? Was any help turned away, as some lawmakers have criticized the government?
This was a incredibly complex operation, and we were able to mobilize an immense amount of gear to the site in just a really remarkable amount of time, given the fact that we started without any sort of vessel response plan for this or any sort of pre-stage resources. And so the equipment that was brought on site this morning that we were using was a pelagic ROV capable of operating at 6,000 meters, cameras, sonar, other articulating arms and resources on it. And it, we had to transport it here through C-17 aircraft. This is 2 aircraft that it took to get this up here. And so we've really had the right gear on site and worked as swiftly as possible to bring all of the capabilities that we had to bear to this search and rescue effort. And it was just a huge international and interagency effort to make this happen. So I'm really grateful for all of the responders that came out to support this and really, search for the vessel. It is a difficult day for all of us, and it's especially difficult for the families, and our thoughts are with the families today. But this was an immense support, and we had the right gear on the bottom to find it. So
Admiral, you mentioned Admiral.
Will you attempt to recover the bodies, can we ask you, though? The victims, will they be recovered?
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this afternoon. There are no future planned press conferences. Updates will be shared to the USCG Northeast Twitter page, and our staff will be available to take down any questions following this.
Can you
Thank
spell
you.
and give us the names of each gentleman?
I have no sound.
All right, that is the end of that U.S. Coast Guard press conference. Rear Admiral John Mauger giving us more on the news we got just minutes before, that everybody on board the Titan has been lost. OceanGate confirmed it. And now the U.S. Coast Guard is giving us a little bit more information about what they believe happened. Now, they found the debris of the Titan, about 1,600 feet from the wreckage of the Titanic. Our correspondent Tom Costello asked, well, did this submersible run into the Titanic and then suffer a catastrophic event, or did it suffer a catastrophic event in the water and then fall down to the ocean floor? It appears, according to the Coast Guard, that what happened was that it did suffer a catastrophic event in the water column, so somewhere above, and then fell down to the floor where it landed, that 1,600 feet from the Titanic. There is no wreckage. It is a flat bottom. So what happened? They say a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber, and they realized this the moment they found this wreckage and immediately notified the families. 5 different major pieces of debris. The nose cone was outside of the pressure hull. The front end bell of the pressure hull was found in one area in a larger debris field. And a smaller debris field, the second one, the aft end bell. Essentially, it imploded. Something went wrong, and it imploded. Now, what went wrong will be the question. The ROV that initially found this wreckage is still down there, and it's still gathering information. This right here is a virtual model of the Titan that we have made here at NBC News. This is what it looks like or what it did look like inside. When did this happen? There was a question of whether this happened the moment that it lost contact with the ship above it. There is not a clear answer for that, but it does appear to have been swift and immediate. Joining me now from Boston is NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren. Well, Kristen, this is what everybody feared.
Right, exactly. And, you know, the question of when it happened, they did make clear that since they've been on site, they have been listening, dropping these sonobuoys, and there's been no indication of any sort of catastrophic failure that they say they would have heard that implosion. And so that presumably means that it did happen at some point in those immediate hours after it lost contact. A lot of questions also about the crew, whether or not they would continue to search, would they be able to recover any bodies? And the answer to that was that it is an unforgiving atmosphere down there. And they said that the debris was consistent with this catastrophic implosion, and so they weren't confident, but didn't know for sure if they would be able to recover any of the crew members. You know, think about it. This was a 22-foot vessel. It was spread across a debris field. Those pieces that you mentioned in several different places around that smooth bottom surface right in front of the Titanic. So those were some of the questions. We're also beginning to hear from some of the family members. Our colleague Daniel Arkin at NBC News Digital did an interview with the Dawood's oldest sister. Remember, that is the British-Pakistani businessman, his 19-year-old son also on board, and really tragic to listen to how she's reacting. She said she's particularly close with Suleiman, the 19-year-old, and that he, according to her, didn't want to go on the submarine. He did it because it was Father's Day, that his father was obsessed. The Shahzada, the father, was absolutely obsessed with the Titanic from the time that he was a young man. And so his 19-year-old son, according to Shahzada's oldest sister, went with him, and they are among those lost. Also, the CEO, Stockton Rush of Ocean Gate, as well as British billionaire Hamish Harding, and then French diver Paul-Henri
Nargeolet.
Blanking on his last name, Nargeolet, correct.
Yeah.
Apologies, yeah. So, you know, our thoughts with all of their families at this point as well.
Yeah, and let's just give you a little bit more information about who was on board. There's Hamish Harding, as you mentioned. He's a 58-year-old British billionaire, also an adventurer. In 2016, he visited the South Pole with astronaut Buzz Aldrin. He holds 3 Guinness World Records, including one for more than a 4-hour dive in the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. So he's familiar with this deep sea diving, or he was. He was also on Blue Origin last year, that suborbital flight founded by Jeff Bezos. P.H. Nargeolet, who you see there on the right-hand side of your screen, is a 77-year-old, or was a 77-year-old former commander of the French Navy. He is also a deep-sea search expert who has completed at least 35 dives to the wreck of the Titanic. He's considered one of the foremost experts on the Titanic. He also is the director of was the director of underwater research at RMS Titanic, which has the exclusive rights to salvage artifacts from the wreck. Nargeolet was also a part of the effort to find Air France Flight 447, which went down over the Atlantic Ocean. You're talking about a moment ago, Shahzada Dawood, the father. He's 48 years old, was 48 years old. He was a Pakistani-British businessman and philanthropist. As you said, his daughter said that he was obsessed with the Titanic, and he took his 19-year-old son, Suleiman, with him. He had just just finished his first year of business school. And also Stockton Rush. He's the CEO of this whole endeavor of Ocean Gate Expeditions. He was 61 years old. An aerospace engineer with a well-documented love of deep-sea exploration. He designed this submersible, and as we've seen in the past few days of coverage, it was jury-rigged with a video game controller. There was also a lot of criticism about the way it was made and the materials that he decided to use, the fact that it wasn't classed, it wasn't essentially certified to say that this is what it could handle, and there was worry that something bad would happen, something catastrophic, which would mean not only, bad things for him and those people who were on board, but also for the entire industry. And while people might roll their eyes and say this is just a bunch of rich people doing rich people tourism, what it also enabled was the funding and exploration and discovery for science. This enabled a lot more science to understand the deep oceans, which we know so little about. So he was the fifth passenger on that submersible. Let's bring in retired U.S. Navy Captain Bobby Scholey. She is the first woman to serve as the Navy's supervisor of diving. As a diving and salvage officer, she played a major role in the TWA Flight 800 recovery operations in 1996 and supervised diving operations on the 2000 USS Cole bombing in Yemen. And also with me is retired U.S. Navy mixed gas deep sea diving officer Robert Pizzini. He served 26 years in Navy Special Operations. All right, let's start with what it's going to take to recover anything from that far down. The ROV is down there, Bobby, but the families obviously are going to want to find something of their loved ones. Is there going to be anything for them to potentially get back?
Well, first of all, my deepest condolences to the families. It's a really rough time, and I just really feel for them right now. It's going to be very difficult. As the Admiral said, it's a harsh environment, and if the catastrophic event happened in the water column, which apparently it did, chances are that the crew, if there was anything that could be recovered, might have been scattered. And it was an implosion, and like an explosion, that would have done things to the crew members that would make it even harder to recover them. So it's going to be very hard for the team to recover anything. The fact that the ROVs are going to be the resource down there that would be doing the recovery is going to make it even more difficult. So it's going to be a rough time.
Yeah, Robert, talk to me about why there were such concerns about the materials that were used to build this submersible. What was he putting together down there, and why might there have been an accident like this?
Well, to start with why there may have been an accident, clearly, as was previously mentioned, there was an implosion opposite of explosion. So this vessel, which was designed to to operate in a very high pressure environment, roughly, I think 88,000 pounds per square inch. There was a failure. My understanding is this vessel has been this deep before to the Titanic, but at some point there was a failure there was a breach. Beyond a breach, there was a catastrophic failure that just created, odd as this might sound, I think that everybody on board perished rather quickly given the circumstance.
Could part of the issue be the descending and ascending? When you talk to aviation experts, they'll talk about metal fatigue, which leads to failures from the ascending and descending in the sky, the pressure changes up there. Could that have been part of the issue down here, Robert?
Fatigue from several dives certainly is a possibility. I mean, I would say at this point, all options will be looked at, and certainly that's one of the possibilities. Fatigue in underwater operations, there is a degree of fatigue in certain metals and certain things that we use in underwater operations, similar to aviation, as you mentioned, and certainly that's a possibility.
Bobby, the effort to find this, I know that they had an idea of the general vicinity that it likely was because it was going down to the Titanic. Finding it 1,600 feet off the hull of the Titanic, though, it's still a small. It's a needle in a haystack. It's a minivan in the vast ocean. How were they able to locate this so quickly?
It is surprisingly that the location happened quicker than in some of our salvage operations. I think the fact that they had the datum for where the Titan entered the water made it I don't want to say an easier search pattern, but between that, the use of the sonobuoys and the help of those ROVs, those deep ocean ROVs that they were able to get on the scene in the last day or so was a big factor in being able to locate it. And they knew that the ultimate destination was the Titanic, and that gave them a good feel for where to fine tune their search pattern, and ultimately that served to be the key.
So, Bobby, how are they going to? It's by the Titanic, so it's not, obviously in the wreckage, which would have made it a whole lot harder because the Titanic is a protected site, and that would have been a real effort to not disturb the site, but also to remove the wreckage. Are they going to be able to bring up to the surface the remaining pieces of this submersible?
I believe they are. We've used ROVs for salvage operations for decades, and the ROVs that they have there, if they're the ones that I believe they are, will be able to assist with that. And if for the larger pieces, they have that system in place that they brought out for the flyway deep ocean salvage system that they were ready to bring the entire Titan up to the surface with ultimately. So they have all the resources on board out there that they needed, and I believe that they'll be able to use that to recover all the pieces that they ultimately want for any investigation that they decide that they might need.
And what will they do to try to figure out what went wrong? What's the process?
Well, I've been involved in many salvage operations for the National Transportation Safety Board. Now, this doesn't fall under that purview from what I understand. So as the countries involved put their heads together and decide what sort of possible investigation they might need, they're going to look at the pieces. They're going to look at the pattern of the debris field, just like we would in any aviation investigation that would have ended up on the ocean floor. And they're going to look at the metal fatigue, which they can determine by bringing up the pieces. And, it's a science that we've had for many years of how to determine what caused the catastrophic implosion.
Robert, one of the questions that was asked at the news conference right now is what should change after this, whether there should be essentially more regulation in the industry. Do you know why this operation was able to go down to the Titanic without being classed, without being certified by an organization? Is it because it's in international waters?
There's probably not a national governing body. I don't know that for sure, but certainly in other modes of transport, aviation, automobiles, there are industry standards, there's quality assurance, and there's legal requirements. And obviously, Captain Scully would know a lot more about that than I would. But there doesn't appear to be a nationally enforceable standard that I'm aware of. And but on the other side of that, there's adventure and there's scientific research and there's this spirit of discovery that is part of the human condition.
Yeah.
So I think people will always find a way to discover, to pursue passion, and ultimately, we lost 3 astronauts on the launch pad in a tragic incident in the 1960s, and these tragedies, unfortunately, are part of discovery.
Yeah. Robert Pizzini, thank you very much. Bobby, stick around for us. I also want to bring in Mike Reese. Mike is a writer, producer, and showrunner for The Simpsons. And Mike, you've been on the Titan before. You've gone down to see the Titanic. You've been on other expeditions with OceanGate. How are you feeling right now?
Yeah, I'm very sad. Of course, everyone's sad, and I knew Stockton Rush very well. I thought the world of him. I thought he was one of the most amazing characters I ever met. And I also knew Paul. But mostly, I knew this came with the territory. I knew it from the moment I read about the trip. And yet I took it anyhow. Everyone's made a lot of hay about the waiver you sign. You sign a waiver that mentions 50 ways to die, 50 ways this trip could kill you. And we all knew what we were getting into at the time. I'm happier it's happened this way than if they were lingering there and, slowly asphyxiating. But whatever the outcome, whether they survived, whether it had been a slow passing or an instantaneous explosion, it's something they would have grappled with. They would have known this was the risk I took. And I really feel strongly if it had happened to me, I would have felt that way too.
What compelled you to take that trip? I know a lot of people out there are thinking to themselves, why in the world would you ever do this? Why would you sign up for something like this? You tell me why. Why is it? Yeah, tell us.
I think people will understand. The men out there will understand. What compelled me was my wife's. This is her dream. She loves to travel. I like to sit home and watch action movies, and she likes to go out and live them. And I'll go with her. I get caught up in her dreams too. This was something we were doing for her birthday. And the great irony, of course, is they gave us COVID tests right before the dive. And she had COVID, and so I had to go alone. But I loved it. I loved the experience, and there were hiccups along the way. There were miscommunications and problems, even in my dive. Notably, where the implosion seems to have taken place is really where our submarine landed. When I took the Titan, we landed 1,600 feet away from the Titanic. It's something you can't control because there are underwater currents buffeting you all the way down. So I hear that number, 1,600 feet, and I go, yeah, that's where I was. And we spent most of our time at the bottom of the ocean just groping in the dark, trying to find the Titanic. And we did find it in the last 20 minutes. We could have stayed down there.
Wow. So when you get down there, just tell me what it gets to pitch black. You don't really know where you're going. How did the thing move around?
Yes, the sub was very, very simple, and I think that's a good thing. Everyone has latched onto this idea that it's controlled by a joystick from a game controller, and I think that's much better than if it had been run by some high-tech, steering system that, you had to spend months trying to learn or something like that. I was allowed to steer it and move it for a while. There was nothing to it. And the sub is just propelled by two little engines that look like fans you would put on your desktop. Again, the simplicity of it all gave you comfort, that it wasn't overly elaborate piece of equipment you couldn't figure out. I'll go to the idea too, just how safe and secure I felt down there. A lot of people have been amazed by my story that I got in the submarine, and even though I was excited, and even though death was always in the back of my head, I knew when I left my wife I might never see her again. Nonetheless, I fell asleep in the sub on the way down. I was that relaxed, and it was that comfortable and nurturing an environment.
Well, that says something. When you talk about some of the stuff that went wrong when you were down there, what were the issues?
Communications was always a problem. Communications would be spotty and sporadic. I don't think it was a failure of hardware as much as just a problem of, 2 miles of water. I think that would break it up. If you use a cell phone, all it takes is a tunnel or an elevator to keep you from getting through. And so communications would go in and out on all 4 dives that I made with OceanGate. And when we hit the ocean floor to visit the Titanic, the compass was acting up, was very erratic, and was really of no help to us. So that's what made it difficult. We knew we were near the Titanic, and even though it's the biggest thing there, and as you're learning, there's nothing else underwater there. It's not like there are reefs or anything else to get in your way. It's just the Titanic, but it is so dark that we didn't know quite where it was. And we just we pulled together. It was quite inspiring. In fact, there were 5 of us on the ship, including a couple of laymen like myself. And everybody just took a map or manned the computers or looked out the porthole just to figure this out. And we got it done, and we got there.
When you went down with Stockton, I wonder, did he say anything to you about, if something goes wrong, it'll be this or it'll be that? Oftentimes people who have that type of personality will say, this is the adventure we're going on, and then they'll point out to you the vulnerabilities.
He was not, by the way, the pilot. He was not on my Titanic dive. He was on another dive I took with him, where it was just off the coast of New York, and yet we went 1,000 feet down to a spot no one had ever been in before. So, I did have a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. He turned me into the Neil Armstrong of the Hudson River, and he always had a very light attitude. I can't stress enough, as everyone seems to be looking for blame and workmanship. This was the most detail-oriented man I had ever met in my life. He just loved to have meeting after meeting and briefing after briefing, and he loved checklists. We would work our way down checklists every day, and then when the meeting would end, he'd give me this book on the history of checklists that he thought was so great. This, what happened here, I think, is just something that happened. We look for blame, and I think of people climbing the Mount Everest. It's when a climber is lost, do you blame the rope, or do you blame the tools? Do you blame the Sherpa that brought them there? And when really the blame just goes to the mountain.
Mike Reese, Mike, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us. I'm really happy that you made it back up.
Yes, I am too.
Joining me now is entrepreneur, philanthropist, and adventurer Per Wimmer. He was an acquaintance of Stockton Rush and Hamish Harding. Per has been on a Titan expedition as well. Per, when I was reading about Stockton Rush, I came across, as everyone has now, his interview with CBS's David Pogue for Sunday Morning, and he was asked about safety because issues had been raised. There was a letter written to him by many members of the industry saying that this submersible that you have built is not safe, something bad is going to happen, and he was always pushing back on it, and his response to it was, I mean, if you just want to be safe, don't get out of bed. Don't get in your car. Don't do anything. At some point, you're going to take some risk, and it really is a risk-reward question. He added that safety is a pure waste. Is that how you understand Stockton Rush, that the adventure itself, the discovery itself, was worth all the danger?
Yeah, first and foremost, I was signed up for the 2019 expeditions, which ended up not going ahead, not because of safety concerns, but down to pure bureaucracy. So we simply couldn't get the big vessel to steam out of St. John's. There were some bureaucratic problems with the flag, understood. So, but I was very far down the preparations. I've had lots and lots of calls with the Ocean Gate team and presentation from Stockton, etc. And also know quite a few of my fellow adventurers and astronauts who've actually been down on the sub and stuff. So I'm very well connected into that community. The description I would give of Stockton when it comes to safety and also from what I hear from other people is he was actually quite obsessed about safety. And also his wife, Wendy, was really, really keen, obviously, to make sure everything was safe. Yeah, checklist, safety. So there was definitely a big focus on that. And even in the 2021, 2022 missions, where some missions went well, i.e. they went all the way down to Titanic, but some didn't, i.e. they had to abort part of the way and then go back up again. Stockton was always very cautious and quick to abort, just to be on the safe side. So I think, and taking into account what seems to be happening, and also the U.S. Coast Guard description here, where the thing has imploded, it would seem to indicate that it was something with the structural design more than anything else. It is a new design to use composite material, in addition to a bit of titanium on the sides, as opposed to building the entire submersible out of titanium, nickel, and steel, which you would normally do. So it is an innovative design. It was an experimental submarine that hadn't been certified, and I think that's now is going to be where the debate is going to be around.
So why use that material though? Why not go to the tried and true material? Why not do the thing that works and you know is going to work? Why use something new and different and then refuse to get it certified, refuse to get it classed?
Composite material has certain characteristics that it is lighter, easier to maneuver around. I mean, a traditional submersible is very heavy, very bulky, and also expensive, quite frankly. Titanium is a very expensive material. So why he decided to go exactly down that route, obviously only he would know. But it was a new way of building subs. Back in 2018, there were these engineering reports coming up saying that raising concerns about the possibility of implosion, which seems to be the path we're going down now, based on what the U.S. Coast Guard has said. So obviously, but it was debate in the community. And amongst the scientists and the clever engineers. I'm not an engineer, so I wouldn't be able to sort of comment one side or the other. I'm an adventurer. I do adventurous things. In 2008, I became the first person to skydive Mount Everest. Next year, I'm going to space. So that's what we do. But yeah.
Why do you? Why do you do it is a question that people would want to know. Why take all those risks?
I'm an adventurer. I like to push the boundaries up or down and live out my dreams. And I have a big heart and a big appetite on life, and perhaps also a little bit higher risk appetite than most people. But I think also more broadly, we as human beings have always have that desire for innovation, pushing the boundaries. That is in fact what makes us the species we are. We are an advanced civilization. Without that, we wouldn't get there. And sometimes, unfortunately, it does come at a cost. But as adventurers in particular, we want to go higher than the 10,000 meters you're flying up in the air when you fly from A to B, or deeper than the 1,000 meter that most submarines tend to cruise at. Less than 600 people have ever been to space. Less than 200 people have ever been down to the Titanic. As adventurers and innovators, that's what you do. You push the boundaries. You go there and you try to inspire other people to live out their dreams, whatever their dreams might be.
Tell me a little bit about Hamish Harding. I mean, I gave the basics. He was also an adventurer, again, going to the South Pole with Buzz Aldrin, going to the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. He was on Blue Origin last year, space. You said you're going to go to space. What was Hamish like?
He was larger than life. He was a very successful businessman in aviation based out of Dubai, British national. But when it comes to the adventures, he was incredibly accomplished. He had 3 Guinness us that, you know, maybe think extra carefully about the risk profile next time.
Certainly. Per Wimmer, Per, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it. And we're going to sneak in a really quick break. We will be right back. And joining me now is oceanographer and senior advisor for strategic initiatives and special projects at RMS Titanic, Inc., David Gallo. So, David, again, we're talking about the breaking news that the submersible Titan seems to have imploded. There is a debris field 1,600 feet from the hull of the Titanic with pieces of the Titan. And it's believed that something catastrophic happened in the water column, and then it likely fell down to the seabed floor in front of the Titanic. David, what is your understanding, since you know this area better than pretty much anyone, of what might have gone wrong?
Well, I think, Katie, what we thought in the very first few hours after this was reported was the simplest thing, which was that I've heard that the sub called up to the ship and said they had a problem and then that there were dropping weights and surfacing. I can't verify that, but communications were then lost. Then there was reportedly, I can't verify this either, the sound sounded like an implosion. That's the simplest solution. And why did it implode? I mean, there are a lot of different reasons why it could have, but failure of the hull, and you touched on it, your earlier guess, it could have been because as a submarine, every single dive, it's taking that hull and squeezing it, releasing it, squeezing it, releasing it, and you can only do so many of those. So that was a logical thing, that it was a catastrophic implosion, and that meant the sub first came together and then apart, and then all those pieces rained down on the seafloor, which is, sad.
So I know this wasn't classed, but I imagine some testing was done before every dive. I mean, they only could do one dive a year. What sort of checks do they do beforehand to ensure it is as safe as possible, understanding that nothing is perfectly safe down there?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they did it with carbon fiber or exactly what they did. I know that when I was at Woods Hole Oceanographic, I was there 30 years, with our submarine, the team would know that submarine, every single bolt inside and out. In fact, the pilots would take the submarine apart and put it back together again because they had a vested interest in safety. And so that was very different than this. But as you've heard, Stockton wanted to push the envelope. He did. And sometimes this is what happens. Now, P.H. Darsley, incredibly qualified, told me many, many times this is perfectly safe. And, that was enough for me to believe that in his mind it was perfectly safe.
What is the balance between innovation and exploration here? Because I think there was some concern that something like this, if it were to happen with this this submersible, would have a chilling effect on the industry and make it harder for scientific discovery, potentially.
Yeah, I don't think that's a fair thing. I mean, submarines have been around since quite a while, a long while, long before robots. And
well, in the sense that
Russia's
tourism,
the
maybe it'll chill tourism, and you know, you pay $250,000 to do this, and what it enables is it funds a lot of other exploration. It's not just funding this individual trip. Are you worried that for tourism, which is bringing so much money to this industry, it might be harder to find these people who want to do this sort of thing?
No, I don't think that'll ever. I think there'll always be people that want to do this even after this. And you know what's happened is that in the early days, very few people had submarines. They were very costly to put together, very costly to upkeep. Today, with not a great amount of money, but you know, millions, a few millions, you can design and build your own submarine. So, yeah, how do you control that? We're in the early days of the Wild West, except it's a deep sea when the normal person can just go there.
You know, you mentioned P.H. Nargeolet, and you knew him well. How are you going to be remembering him?
Oh, it's going to be tough. I'm still trying to process all this. I mean, first of all, our hearts and prayers go out to all the families and loved ones of the victims. P.H. was the most unusual guy. He was as calm on the deck of a sea in a storm as he was in a Parisian cafe. Incredibly competent, incredibly wise. And, you know, in some ways you want to say this is a wonderful way to go. I hate saying that he's now in the spot that he loved most beneath the sea, which was Titanic. He spent a lot of his time mapping that seafloor and exploring, more than anyone else, in fact. Francis called Mr. Titanic. So which part of him, his smiles and behaviors, or the explorer, it's going to be tough to know which one of those. It's the whole person that's going to be tough to realize that it's gone.
David Gallo, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it. And again, I'm sorry for your loss and for everybody's loss in what is just a tragic situation. That's going to do it for me today. Deadline White House starts right now.
Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in the East. We're following several big stories today, including developments, big ones, in Jack Smith's prosecution of Donald Trump in the classified documents case. Trust me, we'll get to them shortly. But we begin with the breaking news on a story that has captivated the world's attention all week long. Late this afternoon, exploration company OceanGate confirmed that the Titan and all 5 of its passengers on board have died. The vessel went missing over the weekend as it attempted to tour the wreckage of the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean, more than 2 miles beneath the surface of the ocean. In just the last hour, the Coast Guard announced the end of a days-long rescue effort.
This morning, an ROV, or remote-operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris.